Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Nemrock because they allow me, the board and the CEO, Dave, allows me to do community education as part of my job. So I appreciate that. This is going to be a tribute to Gary Larson and the Far Side. I had put something together for the Lions Club a couple of weeks ago, which was just basically showing Far Side cartoons. And I'll be sharing some things about sense of humor from a psychological point of view and spiritual point of view as well today. Just a little bit about Gary. He wrote Farside cartoons between 1980 and 1994, and he wrote over 4,300 cartoons. My selection of cartoons today is from that 4,300. So I purchased this anthology probably 25 years ago, and have spent many hours of enjoyment just going through them. Just in the past couple of days, Gary has released a couple of new Far Side cartoons. Not sure why they appeared just this week, but he had not written a cartoon since 1994, and a couple of surfaced on the internet in just the past couple of days. One disclaimer is for Gary. The Far Side was often offensive to viewers, and I've selected a sample of those cartoons, and I hope that there's no cartoon that offends anybody. But I'm kind of apologizing in advance here in case something does. And my disclaimer is that I don't believe I'm an expert in anything, and my attempts at humor are not intended to offend anybody. And audience participation is strongly encouraged. So please feel free to unmute and ask questions or give comments through this. The question at the bottom asks, what qualifies me to talk about humor? Start out, I've been a basketball and football official for 30 years. And if you don't have a sense of humor, officiating football, you never would last 30 years doing it. So, given me opportunities to handle a lot of criticism without taking it personal. And there's my friend John Emerson and I out on a football field quite a few years ago. Over 30 years of experience as a counselor, and that's given me, again, opportunities to see the humor in life. Neighbor just fired up the lawnmower, so I've got to... Am I being heard okay?
Sure, we can hear you fine, Joe.
Okay.
We can't even hear the lawnmower, at least I don't think so.
Oh, good. And for 31 years, I worked for the Diocese of Gaylord as a elementary teacher, counselor, and director of Catholic Human Services. You can also see I'm pretty bad at photoshopping, but I attempt it. The caption to this slide is that I used to be addicted to the hokey pokey, but I turned myself around. And I did not play drums for Bob Dylan. That's It's another bad Photoshop. Another thing about me personally is that for many years I suffered with what you'd call generalized anxiety disorder, which was um, just kind of a fear of everything, playing high school sports and student teaching and all the things that I did in my own career. Um, I for until I was 37 years old, I had serious problems with it, and have learned to overcome that um, with using humor as a big part of that, certainly. And the caption to this cartoon is, and for the rest of his life, the young reptile suffered deep emotional scars. I've always been an avid basketball player, so if you can't see the caption at the bottom, it says the birth of headhunting. And, so humor tip number one is that you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Um, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know about sense of humor and perspective of life. Um, it's pretty much practicing what we would consider rational thinking and common sense. And the stages of change is something that we use in a lot of different um, counseling applications. But in pre-contemplation, we don't want to think about it. We want to stay in denial that there's a problem. Um, and the first stage of movement is to start thinking that maybe I can make some changes in my life um, for the better. And then in the next stage, we plan and prepare. And in stage 4, we take action and make some significant behavioral change. There are people who join the health club every year and never walk in the door because they never actually get to the stage of action. And typically what motivates people to change is pain. So after enough pain, people make changes. Eric Erickson had 8 stages of human development, and the last stage, which takes place in the golden years, is the stage of integrity versus despair. And there are lots of people in their senior years who are operating in despair. They have a real negative view of life. They are kind of just waiting to die. They've kind of shut down, and then there's a group of people who are doing the complete opposite, living every day to the fullest, um, refusing to give in to Father Time and age, and continue to do the things that they've always enjoyed. In many things, there's the argument of nature versus nurture, which is how much of this is genetic and how much of this is environmental. And I just have a couple slides to address that. So your sense of humor, let's think of your sense of humor as 50% genetic. That you're kind of born or conceived with the funny gene. As a kid, you had a tendency to laugh. You had a tendency to get in trouble at school for laughing. And that was just part of your genetic makeup, how your chromosomes lined up during your conception. 40% of your sense of humor then is how you perceive what is happening, how you see the world, how you were taught by your parents, um, how people modeled humor and laughter around you. And then only 10% of your sense of humor is actually what happens. Um, and if this were true, then your responsibility to find humor in my presentation this morning is 90% your responsibility and 10% mine. So that's one of my favorite cartoons, Nerds in Hell. It's a good fitting day to be showing this one. So we could take anything. We could say happiness is 50% genetic, 40% how you view the world, and 10% what happens. I believe this is true too, because some of the happiest countries in the world are countries like Nigeria and Somalia, where they suffer greatly in poverty and disease and war. But these boys are obviously happy boys, and they may not have food to eat today. It's just another great picture of happiness being displayed. We take those same percentages and apply them to negative things like anxiety. I believe that 50% of my anxiety was genetic. I was a nervous kid. I was shy, feared failure and rejection. But I also believe that 40% of my anxiety was my own thinking, my own perception of what was happening, and I was blowing things out of proportion. And it was only 10% what happened. So we're going to go from the basis that everything psychological, emotional, and spiritual has a physical origin. That if you have somebody laughing, the chemistry of their brain is very different from somebody who is angry. And if you take road rage situations, for example, you probably have people in a road rage situation doing both. You have somebody raging, you have somebody angry at the driver who just did something, and you have somebody else smiling at the same situation. Another example I just saw last week was a lady who had 20 items in a 12 item or less checkout line at Meijer. And as I was trying to find comedy in that, some guy just completely blew up and let into her because she had gotten in a line with too many items. Body, mind, emotion, and spirit is what makes us up. And humor comes from that spiritual higher consciousness that is in the cerebral cortex. This big long word, psychoneuroimmunology, recognizes that mental sickness, depression, anxiety, hate, suspicion, humorlessness, a lot of the things that are part of our world today comes from the absence of laughter and the absence of sense of humor and spiritual health. Everybody has a sense of humor. And your sense of humor is not being funny. It's not being able to tell a joke. Um, it's your ability to perceive comedy in your life. So somebody could have an excellent sense of humor and never tell a joke, never say anything funny. It's what's going on there in their own head that makes them smile, that makes them see the comedy in a situation rather than maybe perceiving anger or anxiety, seeing the um, ridiculousness of, a situation. And then people with a good sense of humor, of course, if you're good at something, you practice it on a constant basis, and you improve on it. That's kind of the purpose of this presentation, is to give you some ideas how to improve on seeing comedy in your life. This is my favorite quote, and it comes from Joseph Campbell. But getting a comedic view of your situation gives you a spiritual distance. And a sense of humor saves you. It gives you the ability to step back and see the big picture. Step back from personal offense, to recognize it's not about me because somebody else is in a bad mood today. It's not about me, it's about them. And this is where sense of humor really, the roots of sense of humor comes from. And sense of humor is one of the affective qualities that makes us high vibration human beings, along with the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, having an unconditional positive regard for the people that you meet, saying what you say and being the person that you appear to be, and having respect for all people. And being grateful for the blessings in your life is definitely ties into the ability to see humor in your life. And this quote is over 2,600 years old. So, and I'm not telling you anything that's new here today. When we think of ourselves, some of us may light up the room when we walk in. Some of us may light up the room when we walk out. And we all know somebody who's just a drag to be around. They can make 5 minutes feel like a half an hour. And then we have people who are just the opposite. They're engaging, they're charismatic, we love to bump into them at the store, and they can make 30 minutes feel like 5 minutes. Of course, there's many benefits to humor and laughter, and these are just a few of them. This is a quote from George Carlin. In the cartoon Beware of Doug, actually I came from Hillman this morning, and our supervisor out in Hillman is Doug Butowski, and he has this cartoon on his wall in his office. It just came out in watercolor, so I have to get him a new one. Again, looking at laughter, it's part of the list of natural rewards. Um, our brains reward us when we eat food, have sex, um, touch and nurture each other, when we exercise, and when we laugh. And so the brain is wired to give us serotonin and dopamine um, in our brains to make us feel good. When you look at spiritual giants who have walked the earth, um, having wonderful senses of humor was definitely part of their makeup. So Gandhi, Mother Teresa, um, and I would say Jesus himself would have had a wonderful sense of humor and would have smiled at a lot of adversity that he faced in his life. It's just part of, it's a big part of a spiritual person. And how we cope with life's adversities have a lot to do with what we learned from our parents, our aunts and uncles, our neighbors growing up, and how we were taught. And this is where I had a wonderful mentor. My dad um, taught us kids how to laugh. Um, he had a whoopee cushion. He had a dribble glass. Um, he was always, a prankster, and we learned that from him, and that was wonderful. When we look at happy people, again, um, physical wellness, happy people take good physical care of themselves. Um, happy people have a lot of horizontal connections, which is friends, acquaintances. Um, they get out and they meet people. They have a vertical connection, which is a spiritual perspective, a connection to a higher power, a prayer life, meditation. Um, they have a confidant, which is at least one person in their life that they can talk to and trust and share, share what's going on in their life. Happy people get their needs met. The way you get your needs met is you ask for help. You um, state what you need, and then the balance to that is, of course, the last one. You help other people get their needs met. So you're a person who's willing to go out and help someone else. And then again, sense of humor makes the list. So what are the blocks of sense of humor? Um, being grandiose or narcissistic, thinking that the world revolves around you, which part of that is the inability to laugh at yourself. Um, we're all fallible human beings and we all do things that are ridiculous, and being able to share them, being able to show that side of yourself to other people is what opens the door to a sense of humor. Built up anger and resentment blocks the ability to see humor in life. Black and white thinking. The world is gray, and people who suffer from black and white thinking, it reduces significantly your ability to see any humor in the world. And that ties right into being perfectionistic or having a lack of a spiritual approach. Bad habits that block sense of humor are listed here. Bad habits are also displayed in the picture. I pick on nuns a little bit for some reason. And this is FDIC, which is the acronym for something to do with banking institutions and credit unions. But we used it to look at frequency, duration, intensity, and conditions. So when you have a bad habit, this is a way you can assess it. How often do I do it? To what duration how long do I do it? And then how intense is it? And under what conditions? So I use this, for example, with people with alcohol problems. So just because somebody drinks every day doesn't mean they have a problem with alcohol. The duration and intensity of those drinking episodes is really more important than how often it happens. And this was our work philosophy at Catholic Human Services. And humor in the workplace was extremely important with the work we did at that agency, because your negative outcomes generally outweigh your positive outcomes. And you do that for 10, 15, 20 years. If you're not able to have humor as an outlet, then you're going to burn out. Whether you're a teacher or a nurse or any profession, finding humor in your work allows you to keep going and get stronger over time, rather than more frustrated and having despair about what the outcomes are. Hiding into that, having lots of funny stuff. So sitting in my office at the house, and the walls are cluttered with some of the stuff that's on the screen, actually. But visiting humorous websites, watching comedy on YouTube, funny coffee cups, all this stuff just adds to your ability to have humor in your day. So my PowerPoint rules, I do a lot of PowerPoints on addiction and mental health and depression and things like that. But still, every fourth slide needs to be something of a humorous nature, a break from the content of the presentation. The caption to this picture is, for Sister Margaret, every day is Ash Wednesday. And then with humor, we want to keep it positive. We don't want to make somebody the butt of a joke or have a distasteful view of something. That humor isn't sick. It shouldn't be. But we want to keep it clean and avoid anybody being personally offended by something. So it's being able to see ourselves as fallible human beings, that we suffer from irrational thinking, and we're going to screw up. The caption to the cartoon is Roger screws up. You might have to look carefully at the picture to get the humor. And so our feelings are the result of our perceptions of what is happening. My anxiety in my younger days was the result of what I was perceiving about a situation. I was never in a life and death situation ever in my life, but I had anxiety about basketball games and football games and public speaking, student teaching, things that were not life and death. So it was definitely coming from me and not the situation. No caption to this cartoon. Okay, I forgot this was in here, but this is an audience thought catcher. So Zoom has the ability to go out there and just grab a thought from one of the participants and display it on the screen. Amazing. Okay, let's move on. One of the amazing gifts of the brain is the gift of wonder and awe. To be able to look at a deer standing in the woods or a sunrise or a sunset and feel a sense of wonderment in your brain, a sense of amazement. And some of those things are God made and some of those things are man made. But we have this ability, and there are people who are awesome at this. And there are people who miss the boat on a daily basis. And humor is part of this. You know, a good joke can be an example, as well as a deer standing in the woods or a sunset or a newborn baby. And this is a part of our brain that we want to exercise and get very good at, is being able to, especially in our golden years, to be able to, usually this gets better over time with most people, but if it's never been developed, it's never too late to work on it. This cartoon, we're going to look at cartoons now. Are there any questions or comments at this point?
Just feel free to unmute your microphones if you have any questions, comments.
I was going to ask, what if you come from a family where you don't remember much humor in the home? Would that leave me?
Well, then you can still work on it today, and you know, it's like social media and television. What I know about sense of humor, the last thing I want to do is end my day watching the news or going on social media and looking at depressing stuff. And typically, I end my day with YouTube videos, mostly music, but very often comedy. So, Robin Williams, Steve Martin, George Carlin, Rodney Dangerfield, whoever you might like, whatever shows you might like, they're all there. And how we end our day is very important. What kind of and watching the news, especially today, if you end your day with the latest coronavirus count, for example, I think that would be pretty depressing, and it just kind of sets the tone. So I had a wonderful childhood full of humor. Recognize many, many, many people haven't had that, but you can make up for lost time, and I know many people who have done that. So,
Thanks, Joe.
sure.
And Joe, I would like to comment that I know some people who are hilarious because they've developed this raconteur thing of going back and forth with each other, just joking and
Oh,
making
yes.
stuff up and saying crazy things. And I always admire that. My mind doesn't think that fast, but I just sit there in amazement how they can toss this like a tennis ball back and forth at each other and
Oh,
just have a
yes.
riot doing it.
My dad used to call it giving people the business. Dad used to call it giving people the business. I call it trash talking in a nice way, though, with my friends. And we're constantly doing that. And it's just, yeah, it's wonderful. I don't mean to brag, but I think I'm pretty good at that, in terms of having a smart ass remark for somebody. It is exactly how my mind thinks. This cartoon is devoted to my dad because my dad's name was Edgar. So of 4,300 Far Side cartoons, Edgar shows up twice. This is making fun of the purpose-driven life or needing to find your purpose that was popular in the 90s. And then Edgar shows up again in this cartoon, which was somebody photoshopped the cartoon. My mother's name was Shirley, and Shirley showed up once in a Far Side cartoon. Came out at Christmas time, titled Fruitcakes of the World. I put this cartoon on my mother's refrigerator, and it disappeared, and I never saw it again. But it gave me an idea for Christmas cards one year, and so I made Christmas cards from that cartoon. Some of you probably know I was a counselor for most of my career, and I got this coffee cup for Christmas one time, and obviously I never took it to work. This is a Far Side cartoon that I photoshopped because the accounting department was on me for losing a gas receipt. I actually had lost the jacket that the gas receipt was in, but things didn't let up, so I sent this cartoon out, and accounting didn't think it was funny.
Good. You're laughing.
So stress, sense of humor is a great stress reducer. It can actually eliminate stress right on the spot. And this picture reminds me of a dear friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, Patty Code, who had a wonderful sense of humor. But she is a terrible driver and would drive her dog around. And I'm sure she scared the hell out of him. And stress, of course, is how you respond to pressures from your outside world. And 70% of hospital visits are stress related. When you think of strokes, heart attacks, I know for me, whenever I throw my back out or put a kink in my neck, it's generally stress related. I'm generally under stress at work or home, or something's going on, and then I turn the wrong way and something goes. There's two kinds of stress. Eustress. EU is good stress. So this is, having a baby, starting a new job, moving to a new house, all good things, but there's a lot of stress around that. And then, of course, distress is the bad stress. So the pandemic, hot weather, or roof blows off your house. And recognizing that we kind of create our own stress, when we own it, then we can manage it better. When we think we're the victim, or other people are jerking our chains or pushing our buttons or creating our stress, that becomes unmanageable. So when we take ownership of our feelings and emotions, then we're able to see humor in life. And this slide, I always say, if you remember anything from this presentation, it's this right here. So back in the 1970s, there was a cliche started by Albert Ellis, who was a cognitive behavioral psychologist. And it said, it happens, or pardon my French, it happens. And it was a positive, humorous spin on adversity happening in our life and things not going the way we wanted it to go. And sometimes it literally happens, right? So this slide is devoted to John Prine, who passed away from the coronavirus just a couple of months ago. An excellent songwriter. And there's a cartoon, of course, to go perfectly with the lyrics of his song. And so it literally happens, right? And one time when I was the administrator at Catholic Human Services, we were opening an office in Mayo. And it was kind of a big deal. And I was wearing a suit and tie, which I rarely wear. And we had the bishop there, and we had the circuit court judge, and we had board members. And I was outside checking the grounds to make sure everything was picked up, and stepped in a big pile of dog crap, and didn't honestly realize it until I got inside the building, and I'm standing next to the bishop, and I'm thinking the bishop smells like poop. and and then I looked down at my shoe and realized it was me. Now that could be a distressing situation for everybody involved, or it could be hilarious. And it's kind of a fork in the road. Where do you want to go with that? And whether I was going to be angry and distressed, or whether I was going to be laughing my ass off, I was still going to have poop on my shoes. And so humor becomes the logical, rational fork to take in most situations, because situation isn't going to change as a result of whatever our emotion is. I just have this in here because I think it's funny. But sometimes it's a small thing. There's a book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. Most of our things in life are small stuff, not worth getting stressed out about. This cartoon titled The Holsteins Visit the Grand Canyon was one of the Larson's cartoons that people couldn't figure out. And does anybody see the funny thing in this picture? So the brother in the front is putting horns behind the head of his sister. That's the joke. Caption to this cartoon is it was an innocent mistake, but nevertheless, a moment later, Maurice found himself receiving the full brunt of the mummy's wrath. Caption to this cartoon: after many years of marital bliss, tension enters the Kent household. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but she's sewing stupid on his shirt. Caption to this cartoon is failed business excursions. The caption to this cartoon is, yes, that's right, the answer is Wisconsin. Another 50 points for God. And looks like Norman, our current champion, hasn't even scored yet. The bluebird of happiness, long absent from his life, Ned is visited by the chicken of depression. The Anderson boys were never seen again. Colonel Sanders at the pearly gate. Custer's last view. No caption to this one, but I have a cousin who's a jazz musician, and this would be his perception of hell. This is a Photoshop of a cartoon using my dog, Henry, as chose this cartoon because it's kind of fitting today. A lot of jerks are showing up, seems. Caption to this cartoon is New York, 1626. Chief of the Manhattan Indians addresses his tribe for the last time. It was a bizarre spectacle, but no one ever ridiculed the teapot kid. Well, lad, you caught me fair and square, but truthfully, as far as leprechauns go, I've never been considered that lucky. An instant later, both Professor Waxman and his time machine are obliterated, leaving the cold-blooded, hot-blooded dinosaur debate still unresolved. So then I says to Borg, you know, as long as we're under siege, one of us ought to moon those Saxon dogs. The picture is bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we all have a brain about the size of a walnut. Now this end is called the thagomizer, after the late Thag Simmons. After this cartoon, scientists actually renamed the end of the tail of the Stegosaurus as the thagomizer. Unbeknownst to most theologians, there was a fourth wise man who was turned away for bringing a fruitcake. Ha ha, Biff, guess what? After we go to the drugstore and the post office, I'm going to the vet to get tutored. Okay, Mr. Thornton, let's begin by talking about your mother. Caption to this one is Adios, Amoeba. And that is it, I believe. Yes. Are there any questions?
Well, Joe, I'll just make a comment. It's been a long time since I thought about Fireside cartoons. My oldest son used to collect all of them. He has a bunch of books of them.
Mm-hmm.
Been a while. He certainly has a different sense of humor.
Yes. So,
Joe, you talked about the, I'm sorry, Joe, you talked about the anthology of Gary Larson cartoons. Are those
Yes.
still available to purchase?
yes, they are.
Great.
They come in hardcover or paperback now. I put my email here because
you.
if anybody would like a copy of a cartoon or a copy of the whole PowerPoint thing, I'll be happy to send it to you.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you, Joe. It was very enlightening for me. I really appreciate you doing this.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, take care, everybody.
Thank you, Joe,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody for joining in. We'll end the program now. Have a good day.